So good morning, everyone, and welcome to Workshop 3. Oh, it's so great to see you. There's the room. Welcome to Workshop 3 for Regen Brisbane and QSEC's Beyond 2032. So lovely that we were able to be so flexible and bouncy. Our first workshop was in person and online. Our second one was entirely online because so many folks were sick. And now it's nice to be back online and with you in person. So first, I'll just share screen so that we can remind ourselves of what we're all up to today. As I mentioned, this is Regen Brisbane, and we're all about a network of individuals and organisations. And we've only just really gotten started to think about and work together about how Brisbane can be a regenerative city. But in particular, we've got this big looming issue of the Olympics in 10 years' time, which is both a challenge and an opportunity to really get together and talk about what our city means to us, what we love about it, the things that we're worried are going to happen to it, and then get really serious and get down to nuts and bolts about what will it mean, what do we have to do to make Brisbane a regenerative city. So that's our big picture. But first, I'd like to acknowledge country. I live, work and play on the beautiful lands of the Yagara Turrbal peoples up here in North Brisbane. And I think I've told this story before, but given today is all about the environment, I think it's lovely for me to reflect on the fact that here in North Brisbane, this image is of the water lilies in what non-Indigenous people now call the Nudgee waterholes. But what's lovely is I live in Banyo, and I discovered when I first moved in that they are apparently, and I hope this is right, Turrbal words. Banyo means ridge, and Nudgee means black duck, and Nunda means waterhole. So technically this is actually the Nudgee Nunda. And I think that's beautiful that even in the colonial impacts of days gone by and ongoing today, the names and the words of the places that are around us here in this beautiful place, this city, can remind us of what's been lost and what we can rebuild. So yes, I'd like to acknowledge the remarkable Indigenous and First Nations peoples of this continent, the way that they have cared for country and cared for each other since time immemorial. And I'd also like to invite you all to take a big, deep breath and have a think about where you live, on whose country you live. I'm assuming many of us are all together here on Turrbal and Yagara country. And just to start getting us into the mood to think about the environment, have a think about the favourite bird or insect or plant or critter that visits your yard, that visits you where you live. These are our neighbours. And if we think about the world in a non-human centred way, these are the neighbours that are keeping our environment going around us while we use nature's gifts and hopefully are giving something back. Because what I wanted to just introduce before we talk about the program for today is one of the reasons that myself and Kira and James Lee and others inside the AILA group are excited about the regenerative movement around Australia and the world is that we hope it's an opportunity for folks to really consider what it means to shift away from thinking about planet Earth as a group of resources for our use and to move back towards, and I'm sure many of us already have this view, but how we can share our love of the living world with others and inspire people who maybe don't care as much as we do to think about how we build a human society that respects and adores and supports the rest of the living world. So I just wanted to bring that image into our minds as we talk about our environment today. Sometimes we get a bit lost and caught up in the techno fixes and the ideas that have to be really, very importantly, changing over from energy systems, changing over from building materials. But at the end of the day, this is what matters. Life creates life on this planet. And what we do to support that is the important work that we have to do next. Now I'm going to stop sharing until it's my turn to actually give my little intro talk about our bioregion. But what I wanted to do was introduce our session today and then hand over to Kira and Elise, who are in the room there in Brisbane, to give their introduction as well. So firstly, as I mentioned, this is our third workshop in the Beyond 2032 series. And this is the one that lights me up because I love human beings, but I really, really love the non-human world as well, and possibly a little bit more. So today in our session, we're going to be talking about, so we're going to have the same format as the past. And if you haven't joined us in the past, then we normally have a 1 hour session of provocation where we have 3 or 4 speakers sharing some thoughts on the topic and theme of the day. And then we've got time for breakouts and discussions. And what's exciting about the in-person stuff is you guys get to create all those cute little yellow stickies and things, put them all over your butcher's paper. So today's lineup of guest speakers, very weird introducing myself. Maybe I'll hand over to Kira to introduce our guest speakers, so that's a little less weird. But yeah, really want to acknowledge everyone joining us today, especially if you've been with us for the journey of these workshops. The next steps will be to have our 4th workshop in September, pull together all the materials and ideas that people have shared and put them together in a lovely way. And I'll let Elise talk about what QSEC are going to be doing with that information and materials. But I might hand over to the folks in the room to do their acknowledgement and hellos. And Kira, if you wouldn't mind reading out the program for the day, that might be nice rather than me doing it. Thank you.
You go and I'll get it. Thanks. Thank you. Hello all. Sorry, I'm a little bit taller than Kira. So hi. And we can't adjust the screen by the look of it. So I'm going to have to stand like I'm a little crooked person.
Oh, hi, Elise. We love you even if you're crooked.
Okay, thank you. So my name's Elise Parrops. I'm the CEO from the Queensland Social Enterprise Council. And as I said to the group today in the room, we too would like to pay our respects to Indigenous elders of this land, which again is the Yagara and Turrbal people, and pay respects to the elders past, present, and the future that we hold together and share together in our common interests in this place that we call home. Today we are talking about the environment. I just want to take one step back and just invite people to think about why we're here actually is because Mark here, Dr. Mark from Natura Pacific is in the room with us today, and he called me after a experience he had online where he saw some of the big founders and the big supporters for the Olympics talking about, you know, it'd be great to get the super yachts here and make sure that they're all accommodated really well. We happen to have a different view of what the Olympics opportunity has. And we felt that very strongly, Mark and I spoke passionately together. We need to actually have a voice that's equal in this space that respects not just the economic and the single bottom line that is going to come from the Olympics, questionably, but also we need to build beyond what this opportunity is. And it's not just about 2032 and the Olympics. We've got a net zero target emissions target for 2030. Ooh, okay, let's get our skates on. How do we also not just want to do sustainability well and a response to society that will provide not just for an economic return, not just because we need to be sustainable now and because carbon neutralism is okay. We actually need to think beyond that. We need to think beyond business as usual. We actually need to think about what systems are we changing? How are we designing for our future societies? And how do we actually work together in partnership and not just expect government to turn on a dime, not just expect corporates to catch up with the program, not just expect communities to wear the costs. How do we all work together in this space and really make a designed plan and an implementation strategy, an action plan that will help get us all to a better future, a more regenerative future for all of us to share. So today, obviously, as Michelle said, we're in our 3rd workshop. Our next one is going to be our economies, which is coming up early September, where we're going to be talking about circular design of economies and how we might be able to use economies at scale, which will have to happen if this Olympics is going to happen, and to also, you know, benefit and perform for humans as well. How do we actually design that future in a much more regenerative way? At the Social Enterprise World Forum, which is the 28th and 29th, we're going to be at the convention centre with quite a lot. I think there's over 1,000 people booked in to come and join us for that adventure. We're going to be talking all things social enterprise and how business can go beyond business as usual. But at our stand, we're going to have all of the themes that have been proposed through these 4 sessions. A graphic designer is going to come and help us to synergize the thoughts and to build a platform that will help us dig deeper into communities. So with the help of Regen Brisbane and Green Prints. We're going to be looking at the Green Prints model over the next year. It will take time because communities come together at the pace of trust. So it will take time, and we will need to dig deep into communities to really understand what are the actions that we need to elicit from this response. And it is our intention to work with Green Prints to present a report to government around what this implementation plan might be, but not just for government to respond to, for us all to act in that space. So that's the bigger picture of why we're here. I'm going to hand over to Kira. She's going to run us through some of the speakers that are here today and the...
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Just bear with me. I'm not a very good speaker, so I, sometimes I will muck up a bit. So I'm just going to share screen. Mish, can you please make me co-host so I can share the screen?
Yes, all done.
Thank you. So I'm just going to, waiting on that.
Just to let you know, the internet in that room seems a little slow. Okay, that's okay.
Yes,
You
yes,
froze
it
up
is.
before, yeah.
It's frozen a couple of times for us already, so
Okay.
hopefully it holds on. Okay, so this is the program for today. We're doing the introduction right now. Once that's done, we will be going into the speakers. So Dr. Michelle Maloney, who you just heard, will be talking about an introduction to our bioregion, catchment and ecological foundations for life in Brisbane. After that, we will have the wonderful Wayne Cameron from Brisbane Catchments Network and also Bulimba Creek Catchment Coordinating Committee, talking about Brisbane's biodiversity and what we can do to make Brisbane more regenerative, leading up to the Olympics and beyond. Next, we'll have Basha Stasik from ACF talking about the campaign Save Our Big Backyard, and Delwyn Jones, who will have a lot of interesting information to share. She's from EVA Institute, and she'll be talking about making our city nature positive. After that, we'll just have a quick working lunch, and we'll come right back to do our interactive workshops. And the questions that we'll be asking, we're going to list some of the natural environment features and places in Brisbane that we love, what our visions are for a healthy, vibrant environment within our city, and what are some of the threats our living world faces in Brisbane. Then we'll come back and give some feedback to the larger group, and then wrap up the conclusions and close right on 4, hopefully. And then I can introduce the speakers once they come up. Do you want to start, Michelle, now?
Yes, that would be lovely. Thanks, Kira. If you could stop sharing screen, that would be great. And actually, I can also take over. Might be quicker for you. All right, so thank you so much, Kira and Elise. That was a wonderful introduction and a big reminder about why we care about Brisbane and what some of the issues are. And I guess I would also just add to that before I begin my sort of discussion about Brisbane itself is Regen Brisbane hosted its first in what will be a series of community forums that were online, discussions about the Olympics itself. And we had Jonathan Shree and Amy McMahon and Elise speaking about some of the initial plans that we're seeing and hearing about coming out of the government about the Olympics. And what we're going to be doing, and we invite everyone to be involved, is we're actually going to start piecing together a people's plan for the 2032 Olympics. So it's a huge task, and I'm not sure we'll get it all done, but we would love to coordinate it, but we'll only be coordinating it. Everyone will be doing input. It'll include lots of maps, gaining as much information as we can, and connecting and building relationships with folks involved in the decision-making processes where possible, and actually countering some of their proposed ideas, so that even if certain aspects of the Olympics will be positive, that perhaps we can have a voice in tempering those things that are not so positive. So now I'm going to change hats and be a guest speaker. So thank you for having me, everyone. I'm so excited to talk about Brisbane, my beautiful, beautiful home. And I'm going to, Kira, if you could somehow wave to me at 15 minutes after now, I'll try to keep an eye on time too, but we all know I could talk under concrete, so it's a challenge. So this is what we think of when we think of Brisbane often. It's the beautiful winding river through a very busy, modern, almost permanently under construction sort of city. And I think we all love it for many reasons. Its location in the world, the connectivity to going out west, to going north to the other beaches, going south to the Gold Coast, trippy and around. When friends moved here from other places, they're just delighted that they're literally 2 hours from anything from white sandy beaches to some of the most beautiful temperate rainforests in the world. But let's go a little deeper, both into our thinking about Brisbane and into time, because so much of human planning and thinking about modern life is busy, busy, busy. And it's always what I would call rearranging the deck chairs. We're looking at what's left and we're trying to work out how to use it best. What we need to do to be truly regenerative in our cities, towns, communities, peri-urban, urban, regional, however you want to describe how human settlements exist. So we actually have to take stock of where we live, the living world that supports it all, and how can we be a force for good? How can we be, as I'm looking forward to Dell's talk around nature positive, and is it possible in all places? It may not actually be with many of our modern cities to even convert them to something more regenerative, but we're not going to have time for all of that today. I invite you to begin this deep thinking of where we live by giving you a short 12-minute overview with a few pickies about the river, the bioregion, and the catchment that we're all connected to. As a wonderful Indigenous leader and friend, Anne Paulina, says to all of us as non-Indigenous people and those who are Indigenous, she says it to all of us, you're part of this place. For those of us born here, your DNA is literally in this place. For those who have come here, you are part of this place. And I think that's a beautiful invitation to recognize the interconnection of all of our lives. If you've had children here, what a beautiful thought that literally in their DNA, in the makeup of their mineral components, there are elements of the oxygen and the atmosphere and the soils and other life here inside their bodies and possibly inside yours. So I'm actually going to start by reading from, and I meant to get a picture of the book, and I'm sure many of you have read it, and you can't see it because I have a green screen thingy. A River with a City Problem, A History of Brisbane Floods by Margaret Cook. Absolutely brilliant book. And if you haven't read it, please do. But I have two short pieces I wanted to read to you. You didn't think you were coming in for a literary reading experience, did you? But I can't say this better than she has done it in her beautiful book. So first I'm going to read a chunk about the old history of this place. And then I'm going to read a little chunk about the Indigenous peoples and their relationship. And I'm just reading from the book, so I'm not pretending to be Indigenous or sharing Indigenous wisdom or anything like that. So first on page in the introduction, I just want to read this. The Brisbane River system is approximately 40 million years old. Let me just say that again, because in our daily busy lives, we don't contemplate this. The Brisbane River system is approximately 40 million years old. Its present course was established in the late Miocene era, about 10 million years ago. Water cut gorges through the hard Devonian and Jurassic rocks and formed sinuous patterns characteristic of slow flowing rivers. The Brisbane River catchment, the land that contributes runoff to the river, that's what a catchment is, the land that contributes runoff to the river, is 13,560 square kilometres, bounded on the west and south by the Great Dividing Range, on the north by the Kooyar, Jimna and Conondale ranges, and on the east by the d'Aguilar and Tevio ranges. Much of the catchment is rural, used as grazing, cropping and forestry land. Within the catchment are the towns of Kilcoy, Fernvale and Lowood, the urban centre of Ipswich on the Bremer River, and Brisbane, Queensland's capital city, which is bisected by the Brisbane River. So our beautiful river has been chugging through its pathway for 10 million years. And what this book talks about endlessly is how when Australia was colonised, the people who came to this place saw vast and remarkable resources. And quite frankly, from day one, didn't see aspects of its beauty or its needs as a river. And there's some beautiful quotes in here, which we don't have time. I'd love to have a book discussion about this book, about even from the day they started planning, the planners did not care that they put everything on the river, like right up to the river's edge. And one person has actually written that they'd never expected the city to come to much, so they didn't bother building beautiful things. Some of the attitudes that she's pulled out of these colonial ideas about, let's move in, woohoo, here's some resources, the size of the trees along the river that used to be here, all of these things we're going to explore in great depth next year, or early next year, the end of this year, in the Green Prints process. But I just wanted to read one more thing before I show you some more pictures. In her book, she says, different Dreamtime stories tell how the Brisbane River was created, because Brisbane is tourable country, with land stretching from the mouth of the river to the Moggle, north to the North Pine, and south to Logan. The Dreamtime stories, one of which says, it tells how Murugara, the rainbow serpent, became stuck as she made her way up a dry creek. Murugara called on Yara, the rain, and Nalan, the cloud, to help. As the storm thundered and rain flowed into the creek, the water seeped under Murugara's belly, allowing her to wriggle from side to side. This movement formed the sinuous river called Maiwa. And now Murugara decides when the big rains come and brings the floods, and Maiwa provides sustenance and recreational activities to life. So lots of lovely things to think about, but the 10 million year old pathway of our current river is just mind-blowing to me. So what I wanted to do was set the context, just a little snippet of context for the work that all of us are going to be doing, because as Elise mentioned, and I love the passion with which she explained this, you know, the things we're looking at, the decisions that are being made around us are not just those decisions rightfully made by people who, you know, in authority. All of us should have a say over how we care for our home. So I just wanted to introduce bioregions and remind us that there's a phenomenal amount of Western science that already tells us about places. And all of this information can be woven into our thinking and our feeling and our analysis of what a better future can look like for a sustainable or regenerative Brisbane. So for those who don't know, and I know I'm flicking from sort of reading from a book to jumping into science and maps, bear with me. If you've never seen this map, what I should use, and we've got one, I forgot to find it, is the map of Australia without the political boundaries. And the simple way to look at this is Western scientists had a look at country and have been spending for many decades working out, well, what is Mother Earth telling us about a place? These are rainforest places. These are desert places. They've all got their own geology and soils and history and into prehistory. They've got their own vegetation types and their own unique endemic species of plants and animals that have co-evolved together for millions and millions of years. And for example, I remember wandering around Kings Canyon up in the middle of Australia and seeing this little sign that said, these are 300 million year old ripples in the sand. And they were still there, they'd just been uplifted. Now that's how, when we say ancient Australia, we often roll that off our tongue like a cliche, but this place is old. The absence of phenomenal new geological activity means that these places that we are part of are so special and so old. We must be aware of our ancient history. So bioregions are Western science's way of saying, hey, these places are different from each other. And it comes from the geology up. And there's lots of history behind it. And James Lee and myself have been working through the Green Prints process on understanding all the scientific side of this stuff. And it's really cool. We can bore you about it next year or whenever you want. But over here, this is very strangely called the Southeast Queensland bioregion, because actually about a third of it's under the border. So as usual, Westerners, we're not real good at giving names to things that are appropriate. But bear with me. Our bioregion, one of the understood and established bioregions in the Australian system, is called Southeast Queensland, which is handy for us, not so handy for Lismore and other places trying to look at that. And if we zoom in a little bit more, what you'll see here is something out of the early days of our Green Prints map, which shows you the Southeast Queensland bioregion nestled next to other bioregions. So you can see that Lismore and Grafton are technically part of this geologically kind of described place with similar plants, similar vegetation, but unique and different in all little ecosystems. So let's scale down a little more. Let's start peeking at Brisbane. So Brisbane's in the middle of our bioregion. Oh, I did have more maps, but I realized I didn't have time. Good on me. I'm training myself to, yes. Okay, so that's that's the beginning of thinking about a bioregion. And in our workshops that we'll be inviting you to, we do fun things like work out which animals and plants live in a place by playing biodiversity bingo. We work out your terrain, and we create games that help you identify as, you know, a Highlander or a sand person. Lots of ways to do that bioregional connection. But there's lots of different ways that Western science has explained the world. And interestingly, the definition of catchments and the marcation of space. Catchments were very commonly used as the boundaries for Indigenous Aboriginal people's lands as well, but they're all very different. And I normally pop up the map of Aboriginal Australia, which shows you the map of Aboriginal Australia, even though Mary Graham and others say it's not quite right, but it's right enough to show people the hundreds of communities that lived very established in place. It looks a lot like the bioregional and sub-regional map of Australia. There are no straight lines. You've got desert people living in the desert way with desert laws. You've got rainforest people living in rainforest ways. And so a catchment is actually really important to Brisbane because we are a river city. Knowing about our bioregion is awesome, but in the work that we do, I guess you'd say it's pluralistic. We're interested in all the different overlaying ways to understand place. If you're a Westerner, these things make sense. If you're an Indigenous person, maybe another way makes sense. And certainly the stories and the old law is something that we hope and look forward to getting connected to much more next year. But here you can see our catchment. A catchment is an area where water is collected by the natural landscape. It's not rocket science. It's just places where all the water gets into. It's lovely. And I like this because it's a hand-drawn map of the big catchments in Australia. So you can imagine there are so many different ways to perceive our living world and the environment that don't include the political boundaries. And I'll be the person annoyingly in the corner every time Regen Brisbane's doing stuff, banging on about, but what if we take away what's politically acceptable, what's politically real? What does this living place need? What does it need to be healthy? And what can we do to contribute to that rather than endlessly taking from it? So back to Brisbane, and I've got a few photos which I'm going to whiz through really quickly because I talk too long as usual. So I'm not going to read that. That was a standard. I skipped the biodiversity because I know our other speaker, Wayne, is going to talk to it. But I wanted to show you this, and I really want to acknowledge James Lee. He's my wonderful colleague in Ayla, and he's on this call today, and he helps me dig up maps. I say I want to see stuff, and he finds them. He's like a wizard. So this is a really cool legend. This is vegetation before colonial settlement. And the only reason, we're not going to go in any detail on this, but just remember there's tons of information about how places were and how they are. I just want to show you what the city looks like now. I think that's a really powerful story. Yes, Del just put her hands to her head. It's really powerful. We almost look like a parasitic cancer. And if you look across maps that show the endless expansion of towns and cities, on the one hand, if you've got a pro-growth mentality, that's exciting. But for someone like me, it's like, oh my God, what happened to all the plants and the animals? How have we interfered with the catchments and the river system? What's going on? And these are the stories that we want to explore inside Greenprints. What does this place need to be healthy? It's not always about rearranging the deck chairs and arguing about that one park over there. It is, because every living thing that's left matters, but it's also about, hang on, this is a 10 million year old catchment, and we've managed to stuff a lot of it up in 150 years. What can we do? Not to whinge and complain and bash ourselves on the back, but to be really positive and to think about a better future for this place. So I just wanted to, and I don't have time for this, but bear with me. There's some beautiful old photos that we dug up, and we presented these last year in one of the launch events. But so this is 1851, looking at the Moreton Bay hinterland. This is a drawing of Kangaroo Point. I love this one, only because it shows what, you know, this is South Brisbane from the North Shore. These are, it's a photograph from 1881 and 1880, the painting, sorry, that you can see in the Queensland Art Gallery. That's Brisbane. Trippy, man. And we're such a young city. These are some of the historical stuff we were digging up. 1925, the amalgamation of the 21 shires that existed to form the Greater Brisbane City Council. Isn't that interesting? 1937, lots of hyacinth clumps floating down the river. And this is Brisbane just in 1930. And that's from the 1980s to today. And you can just see the scale of development and change. I'm not going to play biodiversity bingo. We do not have time. But I hope that that little talk has introduced you to the notion that we live in a remarkable geologic history and we are part of it. And I love it. I love this place. And I hope that we can all work to introduce nature's voice into these discussions in a way that it's not often done in Western society, both through respecting Indigenous law and Indigenous knowledge, but also connecting ourselves with this place, which we are part of. So thank you very much. Kira, would you like to introduce our next speaker? And I'll butt out of it and sit back and enjoy. Thanks for your time, everyone.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. Everyone's clapping. Very, very enjoyable. So the next speaker we have is Wayne Cameron, who is from Brisbane Catchments Network and also from Bulimba Creek Catchment Coordinating Committee. He's going to talk about Brisbane's biodiversity and where to, how can we make this city more regenerative coming up to the Olympics. So I will share screen. And also we're having a few internet issues here. So I might just try and, before Wayne speaks, I might just try and transfer the Wi-Fi and hopefully that doesn't do any damage. So yes, Wayne Cameron from Brisbane Catchment Network and Bulimba Creek Catchment Coordinating Committee.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks, Regen, for having me. Yeah, I'm talking today from a grassroots perspective, representing Bulimba Creek Catchment Coordinating Committee, which is my B4C, my Catchments Network, BCN, which is a combination of all the catchments of Brisbane and 14 in all, and all grassroots volunteer-based groups mainly. Yeah, so basically B4C, my group is a social enterprise working as a urban land care group. We've been operating since 1997 and we work with the community at the grassroots level, rehab, and we've got our own working unit, one of two in the catchments. The 14 catchments, only 2 catchments, so we've got their own commercial enterprise. BCN is a combination of all those groups, the 14 catchment groups of Brisbane, who also trickle down. Everyone that's in a catchment, usually in a land for wildlife or conservation covenant or bush care group. So it's a network, a grassroots network that's quite comprehensive. And BCN has been operating independently since 2011. Brisbane at the crossroads, bit of a big statement, but looking at our natural values of Brisbane. So what are they really? It's a city of small nature reserves, natural areas, and the bay, and the linking corridors between them. So these natural areas like Mount Cootha, like Karawaffa Forest, like Belmont Hills, Whites Hill, are all hills, obviously. And they've been protected probably because of that topography and retained as nature conservation areas. Not that they haven't been under threat for all the years I've been involved. We've had to fight for everything that we've got in Brisbane from the grassroots with help by our networks. The corridors that link them are quite interesting in Brisbane, that they're usually waterways that link a natural area to a major river or waterway. And those rivers have got the biodiversity that Brisbane has and allows it to move, exchange DNA and survive in the system. And Moreton Bay, of course, is a very potential and also economic values, including fisheries, tourism, recreation, of course. And we're part of the Southeast Queensland region, as Michelle has just pointed out, which is a highly biodiverse region. And so coming into Brisbane, we have a city that hasn't got the big reserves of the big parklands of Melbourne and maybe Sydney. Our Botanic Gardens, to put you in perspective, is 10% the size of Sydney's. So our areas, even though we've got these nature reserves and natural areas, including wetland areas like Tinchy-Tambor and Boondall and parts of the Bayside, which are protected to a certain extent. We haven't got the big Flinders Park, we haven't got the Royal Park in Melbourne, anything of that size. Maybe Karawatha is the biggest of the reserves. Mount Coot-tha could also be in there, but you've got to go out to the Diagla Range and further to get the really big national parks, which leaves Brisbane's urban nature reserves, their corridors and their links to each other is really important. So creating a biodiverse city, well, we've got one. And the point is that we don't want to lose what we've got. A lot of the cities around the world have lost their nature connection, their environment. Some of them are heat islands and mortar and stone and concrete, not much else. We haven't got that. We've got something special in Brisbane, and we retain good viability for our biodiversity. So protect what we have would be a great way to start. And when you're protecting, you're sort of on the back foot all the time. There's always something threatening what we have. There's the nature reserves. You know, for a start, if you've got a nature reserve like Whites Hill or Karawatha, do you put a mountain bike maze of tracks through the middle of a conservation zone? Is that a good idea? Do we cater for one use, a recreation use, above the values of conservation, and which can be shared and shared to a better degree by all the community over time? We're only touching the surface, but walking through or riding through a degraded bushland, devoid of investments in rehabilitation and conservation values, you've got a Clayton's environment to look at. So there's other things. There's like trying to bring back a wildlife awareness into the city. We used to have Gondwana land at South Bank Parklands when it was called Parklands. That was economically non-viable. But if ever there should be an investment in Brisbane, if ever there should be an investment in Brisbane's biodiversity, it's in the lead up to the Olympics, and we should be showcasing what we've got here in the way of wildlife, for instance, and aquatic wildlife as well. The future. So the plan for Brisbane 2017, it was an international forum in Brisbane, set up by the state government, the council and all levels of government, involve the community. It allowed people to contribute, and as it did in 2005 at City Shapes. Now, these were two big offers to the community and the broader community of all levels, academia and companies and businesses and industry, all getting together and debating and coming up with ideas for the future of Brisbane. Two things came out of both those conferences, forums. We want adequate and functional green space, and we want a nature connection. So that's what those forums come up with. They're not my ideas, but I certainly agree with them. We've got a nature connection to a certain extent, and we've certainly got a fundamental nature area in Brisbane that's unique. So what are our strengths in Brisbane? it's virtually the community being involved in the care of these smaller natural areas. You know, whether it be a catchment group, a bush care group, land for wildlife or whatever. And supported by local government, state government, the feds as well. They have grants programs that come in and help these groups work. And there's so much to be done. And that's why we went professional, because we were just scratching the surface. We didn't want, and I think that's for a lot of grassroots people. They want to be active in the environment, and they want to get that message out. So our strengths are our green space network, the mantra of a clean green city, which well, we've got a tale of 5 cities in that lower, our strengths recognised. So in there is the biodiverse city, among others. So we are in there. So we've got to advance that. So what can the community do to seek green space improvements for nature connection? What can we do? We can invest in people. We can expand on our network of grassroots groups, give them a say. Think about a forum for the Olympics like we had for City Shapes in 2005 and the Building Brisbane in 2017. I think that the community should come in, and Regen has got a major role in lobbying for that type of connection to the wider community and to the, you know, not just grassroots, but everyone else. Initiate a process of localised research. I won't read all the way through these, but that international forum and our 40% habitat cover in city plan is a really important milestone objective. That in city plan is ensconced. And if that habitat cover is going to be fair income, it's not going to be cut to pieces by other uses. It's going to be intact. People can use it for the right reasons, can enter it, can appreciate it, and we can move from there. So that brings us to the Olympics and the lead up to the Olympics, starting probably now, and Regen's right on the case there. This lead up period can influence what Brisbane becomes. It's going to be some big money spent. There's going to be some big decisions made, and some of them are already pre-made, unfortunately. So it's the Olympics is both a challenge and it's also an opportunity if we can get things right. So there's positive visions can be achieved, but not if all the money goes into the CBD, you know. Also, our suburbs are accused of being boring and devoid of cultural activity. Well, obviously the sprawling city, the urban sprawl that has always been part of Brisbane's development is part of that, and it's also affected our public transport usage. So it's a city for cars, really. So what we can do for that should be spread not only to the CBD if they're making investments in these Olympics, they should spread it to the suburbs. And you're looking at a photo on the bottom there of the Sleeman Centre at Chandler. That was upgraded for the Commonwealth Games in the past, the recent Commonwealth Games, recent for me because I'm so old. So that was a world-class facility. That is a world-class facility, yet they're building an aquatic centre at the Roma Street Centre, right onto the parklands there, you know, putting a hard edge to the parklands. That might be wonderful for Brisbane City, not so good for Chandler and that suburb. Are we going to have zombie centres like Chandler? Yeah, we'll use it for training, but it's bigger than a training venue. It's really should have been considered for something a bit bigger than a training centre. Same with QE2 Stadium. You know, the car parks there, I've only seen a maximum of 5 to 10% cars in them. They're so big, those car parks. If they had to be worrying about building more buildings, there's plenty of space there. But obviously, for those Commonwealth Games, we catered to our strength, which was getting in a car and going to these suburbs, because those public transport connections weren't conducive to overseas visitors, I suppose. So, yeah, so it'll be all in the CBD. If it's going to be all in the CBD, particularly around the Town Hall and Roma Street and Queen Street, yeah, there's a lot of cultural activity happening there. That's fine, but do we just leave these suburbs to be boring? So that's my question there. Kira, I'll just move to the next one. Right, so that gets us back down to where we come in on the grassroots, where we've been battling for years. That top is the Brisbane River Corridor at Lytton, land owned by the Port of Brisbane. So as we get to the lower Brisbane River, development, the development approvals are passed by the corporations that run Port of Brisbane and Brisbane Airport. Now, I've worked in a 5-year plan, 2 5-year plans with Port of Brisbane. And if you go out there to the Bunnings development on the Brisbane River, it's 5 metres from the Brisbane River and you get a chain wire fence. You cannot walk through that 5 metres because some of it is 2 metres and a straight drop to the river. So should we be building onto the Brisbane River and allowing no public access at all? No nature connection, no corridor, no riparian zone? But something happened. After years of dealing with the Port of Brisbane, we were able to convince them to have a 40-metre setback. And this is part of that 40 metres you can see there, and that's a corporate group helping us plant thousands of trees along that degraded, very difficult piece of weed-infested waterway. We're bringing it back in the lower Brisbane River. Then you look below and you see another photo. That photo is of the Stones Corner area, Greenslopes area, which has just been opened, a brand new restoration parklands by Brisbane City Council mainly. And that was advocated for years by Norman Creek Catchment. They were in there for years, as long as I can remember. They've been pushing for that. That a parklands that flooded, obviously, but had a central concrete drain and very little else, you know, people went there to walk through it. That's about all they did. I'm going to kick a ball, but it's on a slope. So what's happened there is a credit to that small volunteer catchment group that stuck to its guns. It's also a credit to the local government, the Brisbane City Council, that listened to it and invested in that. And now, with world-class facilities, that is a real win for an inner city suburb. And if you're looking for a unit, go to Stones Corner, because you've really got something to upgrade that suburb. So I'm getting near the end now. Yeah, the crossroads, the top photo there is of Lucinda Lake. Now it's called Lucinda Lake. It was Swan Lake once. And that was going to be filled in for a car park. Now, that was a fight. That was one of our battles. We pulled in a large network. We needed help. And that's one of the best aquatic bird freshwater lakes on the bay, which is very unusual to have a large freshwater system so close to salt water. So it has a lot of bird life, and anyone can see the bird life, whether you don't have to be a twitcher or an expert to appreciate nature out there. Now that could have been a car park, another car park, if we hadn't have won that battle. So my message is that we have got a role to play from the grassroots. We have a need to reach out to groups like Regen on the next level up and to pull in a wider range of people to realise we've got a lot at stake here we can lose more than we can gain if we don't take the right decision. So, yeah, we've got a stadium down the bottom. It looks wonderful. They're demolishing Gabba to do that, and probably taking a school out and a training track further north for with very old trees, a local parkland for a training track for bicycles. So it seems that they're being catered for well. But looking at those two photos, yeah, we've got to have our nature connection. To bring people in, it's been identified that people want to get that nature connection, and that's where we can come in. So the Olympics can be an opportunity and get people and lift them up so they can contribute from the community, from the wider community. And I think we'll take the opportunity and make something of it. So thank you very much.
Hey, Kira,
Yeah.
can I just say what Wayne was talking about was just perfect and spot on for some of the stuff I've been reading about the history of Brisbane. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but just before we go to our next speaker, can I just reinforce exactly what Wayne has talked about so beautifully and shown us those photos of caring for the river bank and such. Let me just read this to you. The penal settlement in Brisbane closed in 1839. They started to try to develop a new plan for opening up the city. But get this, it made me so angry as a descendant. So this is a way to think about, what are our grandchildren's children going to think about us? Because I'm angry at these people for what I'm about to share with you. The standard plan for the city's application afforded the landscape minimal attention. It was merely rotated here and there to cater for a meander in the river, and with streets terminating at the river edge. Early plans for a wide riverside esplanade were abandoned, removing an opportunity to create a small flood buffer between river and settlement. And this is the bit that makes me cranky. Sir George Gipps, I guess it's Gipps, appointed Governor of New South Wales in 1837, dismissed the idea of the boulevard. Grandiose, and this is a quote, so grandiose boulevards were not required in a town that he believed had little future beyond an ordinary provincial settlement or a paltry village. So they pretty much doomed Brisbane to not pay attention to the flood zone, to the waters, to the land from the day the colonialists started planning. And I just want us to remember that and how important what we're doing now is for the future. So that's enough of me taking liberties as an organizer. Thank you. I'll be quiet now.
Thanks, Michelle. So thank you, Wayne. That was really interesting. Like a lot of food for thought. And we've got our next speaker now, Basha Stasik. Great, thanks, Basha. So Basha is from Australian Conservation Foundation, and yeah, you can go ahead, Basha.
Thanks,
Thank you.
and thanks for the invitation to come speak and talk to you all about sort of ACF's focus on nature and our new nature campaign. So I'm going to really focus quite national and really look at what we're doing or trying to do to protect nature, both at a local level with local communities, but also at a national level, looking at business and the federal government. So I always like to kick off a little bit by talking about the State of Environment report, which no doubt many of you either have read or seen the headlines about in the last month or so. This was the report released by the federal government. It was put together by independent scientists, and it really gave quite a damning sort of review of the state of Australia's national environment. I think actually the minister summed it up pretty well by just saying it's bad and it's getting worse, and that is really the conclusion of the report, unfortunately. And there are a number of different reasons for that. The three leading ones are habitat destruction and degradation, invasive species, and of course, climate change. And I always like to sort of summarize it by talking about the fact that basically we're destroying nature. We're destroying our forests, our wetlands, our reefs, and we're doing that at an incredibly fast rate. And that's really what's the reason for why our environment is the way it is. Now, one thing that's sort of worth keeping in mind is these headlines that we saw in the State of Environment are not actually unique. A couple of years ago, the UN put out a report which was looking at the global environment, and the headlines look awfully familiar. So it's not just Australia that has this problem, it's the world as a whole. And when this UN report came out a few years ago, there was a recognition that there's a need, I'm going to skip this because we're out of time, there's a really need to do something, not just because we want to protect our species and because nature is so important to us, but also because there's an economic cost to come. And increasingly biodiversity loss or nature destruction has been recognized as something that's a real risk to our global economy and our economy in Australia. And it's sort of coming, you know, as the conversation about climate change increases and we see that there's a greater need for action, biodiversity is the other big crisis. And of course, the two are very closely linked. So post that UN report, there was recognition that we really need to see global action. And so through the UN Biodiversity Conference, so most of you will be familiar with the Paris Agreement, which focuses on climate. Nature has its own convention, which is a little less known, called the CBD, the Convention for Biological Diversity. And there's a real push on now to set some really strong global goals and targets to try and guide action. And where scientists have advised the goal needs to go is, this is the wording they've put forward, which is to halt and reverse biodiversity loss from a baseline of 2020 through increasing the health, abundance, diversity, and resilience of species, so that basically put nature on a path to recovery. Now, that's a really, really complicated and long goal. And I think when I first read it, my reaction was a little bit like this. So an easier way to sum it up is that we need to halt and reverse nature destruction so that by 2030, nature is in better health than it is now. That's basically what they're saying, which is pretty straightforward. And they've produced quite a nice little visual representation of what that really looks like. Now, this goal is being debated, as I mentioned, at the Conference of Parties, or COP. Again, many of you might have heard of the climate COP. Again, nature also has COPs. And that is set to happen in December in Canada. And the idea there is basically to agree to a big global agreement that the parties or countries sign on to guide action for the next decade, or more than a decade really, on nature. Now, how do we do it? Well, there's been a fair amount of research into this, and I always like this little diagram because it sort of acknowledges that in order to get there, we need to do a couple of things. So the black line and grey line is really if business stays as usual. So if we do nothing at all, then unsurprisingly, we're going to just see a decline of our biodiversity or nature. If we were to increase more traditional conservation efforts, so things like, of course, protected areas, stronger regulation, more investment from government, that's obviously going to make a difference. But on its own, it's not going to be enough. And that's the sort of orange line. In addition to increasing our conservation actions and around protection and restoration, we really need to start looking at production and consumption. And here, business has a role to play, and business has sort of, been left off a little bit. Well, often when we talk about nature protection, we really just focus on governments, and governments are important, but we can't ignore business activity. And so that's really where ACF's new nature campaign comes in, because we really want to look at all three tiers, of course, community, government, and business, and what those different parts of society need to do. So we call the campaign the Save Our Big Backyard campaign. And it's sort of recognizing that the solution of what we need to do to protect nature in Australia is very simple. To get nature out of trouble, we need to stop destroying it, and we need to do more to restore it so that by the end of the decade, it's in better health. But while it sounds really simple, I think you'd all probably agree that's a really, really big thing to try and actually do. And to achieve it, we need to see all the Australians that love nature pitching in. Not only in, as Wayne, I think, really articulately put, protecting and restoring nature in their local backyards, and local communities, but then pushing businesses and politicians to do the same. And the thing we've got in our advantage is a lot of Australians really do love nature. So this is some research that ACF did a few years ago, looking at how much the different ways that Australians love and care for nature. And really what you can see is that they recognise that it's sort of critical to our well-being, it's critical to our economy, it's critical to our identity, and it's really important, and they want to see it protected. And that's true across party lines. So it's not just Greens voters, it's not just independent voters, it's really across the lines, regardless of what party you vote for, you do actually think that nature and nature protection is important. So which raises the question, why aren't we doing better than we are? And one of the really interesting things from the research was that the vast majority of Australians think that nature in Australia is in pretty good health. Really only 12% recognise that it's in a poor or terrible state. Most people think it's fair, good, excellent, pretty healthy. So obviously when you don't think there's really a problem, you're not really going to do very much about it. And so that's one of the challenges we've got before us, is actually in a way that empowers people, making them and helping them understand that we do have a problem. And of course, the State of Environment report, helps along the way, but we need a lot more of that sort of information. How do we get that out in the community and talk to people? So what's our strategy? So ACF has a sort of three-part strategy. The first one is, as I sort of alluded to earlier, growing a thriving movement for nature. So, getting people protecting and restoring our bush, our waterways, green spaces, in their local communities as a starting point, and then really pushing government and business. And then we need to be pressuring government. So in particular, around law reform, which is the big opportunity at the moment, and I'll talk about that in a minute, and then shifting business to change. So really making businesses responsible for the damage they cause and moving them to transform their investments and their practices so that they are, restoring rather than harming nature. So I'm not going to talk too much about community, because I think Wayne's done that as well, but very well. But really, it's about it's something people can do locally, because that's a really important starting point and helps start a conversation about the trouble that nature is in nationally. Government. Now, all tiers of government have a role, local, state, federal, but I'm going to focus on federal because that's currently where ACF is very strongly focused. And there's a couple of things that the current federal government can do. The first is create strong laws that halt nature destruction. And this is something that the government has committed to. Now we've just got to make sure that they do it well. And they also have got to introduce an independent regulator to enforce those laws. So we don't have a federal EPA, if you will, and that's a real gap at the moment. Provide funding and incentives, of course. And some of you may have heard of this sort of goal that's been emerging around protecting 30% of land and seas. I want to focus very quickly on the laws bit, because as I said, this is something that the government has committed to doing. Some of you may know that our National Environment Law, the EPBC Act, was actually reviewed in 2020. And that report was given to the previous government, and it was a very damning report. It basically said the Act doesn't work. It doesn't work for communities. It doesn't work for the environment. It doesn't work for anyone. And you need to fix it. And so that's a really big opportunity, because this is the primary instrument that the federal government has for nature protection. So that's a big opportunity we've got over the next sort of 3 years, this government, to make sure that those reforms that they undertake do actually fix the problem and put in place strong protections. But even saying, okay, the government does all those things plus more, it's not going to be enough, as we know. So if we go back to that great little graph, we know that increased conservation efforts by government alone are not going to help us put nature on a path to recovery, either in Australia or globally. So we need to touch very briefly on business, because business has a role to play here. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but the way that we look at it from a business angle, of course, is business is reliant on nature. They derive a lot of value, whether you're agriculture or construction or whatever industry, they derive value from nature to operate. And so when we see a decline in biodiversity or in nature, then there is a cost, an economic cost to play. And that's being increasingly recognised. So what can business do? Well, there's two really big things. One is when it comes to our financial institutions, our super funds and banks, it's really about step one, stop funding nature destruction. So things like land clearing, and then transforming their investment practices so that the activities they're funding are activities that are helping nature, not harming nature. Second, especially for non-financial institutions, is eliminating nature destruction from supply chains. And so a good example of this is places like Coles and Woolies, because obviously agriculture is a big driver. What they can do in terms of the products they're selling and whether those products have nature destruction like land clearing and deforestation in their supply chains. So it's a little bit on business. So that's really the 3 tiers of ACF's Save Our Big Backyard campaign. And yeah, we're really focused on growing that movement and then using that movement to together put pressure on government and business around what we can do. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Basha. So we have one more speaker to go, Delwyn Jones. She's the founder of EVA Institute, and she's always got some amazing data and information to share. Delwyn, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Great, thank you.
You should be able to share screen. Yeah, wonderful.
Okay.
Okay, so what does the EVA Institute do? We do eco-labelling and we use life cycle analysis. We do lots of other things, but here you can see a collection of environmental product declarations. These are eco-labels that we do. And for example, an eco-label of a public hospital, and this is a Victorian day hospital. So we model good, better, best. And one of the things that EVA does best is we issue free databases, and our database is the worldwide's most favorite database. Even though it's free, we have double the users of its nearest competitor. So what we do is we model supply chains, and we do what the previous speaker was doing. We expose if there's been a great deal of degradation in the supply chain or not. So why does EVA assess things? We do to show bad news versus good news. One of the reasons we're in the pickle that we're in is that we're all sick of the bad news. We're a bit resistant and what more bad news. So what we've invented is a system of quantifying good news so you can compare good and bad outcomes to generate messages that are positive and that people can use to better measure what the outcomes of what they're trying to do, rather than being overwhelmed by everything else that's bad news. So what's Nature Positive about? Nature Positive is about climate and biodiversity security. It's a United Nations program, and the aim is to stop the loss and return to the gain. And here this graph is taken off one that's on the Nature Positive UN website, and it's showing how much we actually have to grow to replace the loss of biodiversity to the 1750 stage of biodiversity. So it's huge, the losses we have and the aims that we have to retain those things. Now, the reason why we want to retain nature can be very selfish. We need the oxygen. We need the oxygen to breathe. We need the oxygen to form an asteroid shield to ensure that we don't get hit by the kinds of asteroid showers that the dinosaurs did, because they had so much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide is it's a fire extinguisher, and we have more of it now in the atmosphere. So one of the places that we need oxygen is in the upper atmosphere to ensure that those meteorite showers do burn up. We've seen an increase in meteorite hits over the last however many decades. So the risks are very nasty. We need the oxygen, we need plants to grow. Animals in the habitat control plant growth in many ways. So there are very selfish reasons why we need nature. We need nature to control catchment, for example, catchment flow. Concrete doesn't absorb much water. That's why we get so much more flash floods, as well as the induced climate change that we're seeing now. So what does a nature positive city report card look like? We would like to see, rather than just problem statements, we would like to see positive outcomes and see us mapping in policy and city report cards, environmental report cards, start to look at where we need to go rather than what we've just lost. What we've lost is horrendous, but looking at horror stories hardly inspires people to change their ways. Whereas if they have hope and inspiration and a bit of a direction, and they can see that these steps go in the right direction and they can make these steps and if everyone can see those steps, then we can grow some benefits much better than we can if we only look at the negative side of the story. So Brisbane needs to be growing food in the city. We need to be growing passive comfort in the city. Our skyscraper windows that don't open are either refrigerators or ovens, depending on what power supply you have and whether it's on or off. And we need more open space, as our previous speaker talked about. But that open space can be in the city rooftops, and a nature positive Brisbane would look a little bit more like Singapore, in that would have a lot more green walls and a lot more green roofs. You'd see a lot more beehives in the city. You'd see a lot more birds other than ibis in the city. And you would see traffic stopped for ducks occasionally. We would be cycling scrap better than we currently do. We would certainly be more disaster secure than we currently are. We're looking at another season of La Nina, which means we're looking at another flood season this summer. Not a happy summer. We need to be growing medicine, lemon trees, lime trees. We certainly need to be growing oxygen. We pay people a fortune to go work in the city, and then we feed them car fumes, which makes them soporific. And we measure that as scientists. We measure the carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide. We don't measure the oxygen in the city, inside offices. So that's what a nature positive city looks like. This is the closest thing I've seen to a nature positive steelworks. It's a kid's drawing, and it's the world's biggest steelworks, Bow Steel. And it's their 92-hectare park. And every square metre of available roof space has a PV array on it, for example. Now that is what our businesses should be looking like: parks and PVs, water catchment. That's a river city. Some people are already doing it. And in Australia's case, where we buy most of our steel, is already doing it. So Chinese steel is way behind Australian steel in that regard. In many other regards, of course, it isn't, but in that regard, it is. Okay, so one of the things we have to know is where the biggest loss is, because that's where you're going to make the biggest gain. And shaming people for being bad performers is not really helpful unless you can say, okay, we can help you resolve these losses, and so you can be looking at a gain. So this is a Coles supermarket, and we did some work for them. They now have a commitment for nature positive, zero waste and zero carbon, and they know where their carbon footprint is worse, where the products in the buildings and the operations are, and no surprises, it's in the refrigeration and the supply chain. And this was in a Victorian supermarket. The three biggest industries in terms of the Brisbane city are already well on track to going to zero carbon. There we have plans and what you would call them, scale runs of carbon zero aluminium, carbon zero cement, and carbon zero steel. So those are the biggies, and they're doing their work. So industry is pulling its weight in many regards in terms of climate. It needs to be doing the same for biodiversity, and some of the work we're doing will encourage them to do that. But at the moment, industry is not counting biodiversity loss at all very well. Okay, the methods we use is we draw a boundary around the system that we're going to assess. We count what goes in, we count what goes out. And this is, for example, the looking at our solar system. We have a finite amount of water, that little blue ball. We have a finite amount of air, that little pink ball. The place we live on is depicted there as the thin skin on the apple. The white part of the apple we can't live in because it's too hot. So we have very limited resources. That's all that's trying to say. We've got a lot to do on global communications and training. We need to be looking at our challenges, not just at the bad news, but also the solutions. So for example, one of the biggest opportunities for Brisbane for its biodiversity is actually in its city, not necessarily looking to the wildlife where I live and the wilderness in Mount Tamborine, but making the city look like Mount Tamborine with parks and gardens and green roofs, and certainly greening up all the verges. Why we have grass on verges where no one walks and no one plays anymore because it's too dangerous is obscene. We're down to about 4% soil carbon in the city. We need to be back up to what it was pre-settlement, which was about 15%. So if we just greened our verges, we would do a massive amount for biodiversity, climate, and flood mitigation. A tree will slow down and hold the capacity of 100 times its ground area because it catches the water on the leaves. So that, as a flood mitigation initiative, just planting up the verges would be very, very significant and easy to do technically. Okay, I've sent copies of these which each of you can get, so I don't want you to read this in detail, but we need to change the policy settings. Using the big stick and lots of bad news hasn't gotten us very far in the last 50 years. We're immune to it, we're over it, we don't want to hear it anymore. It's too depressing, it's awful. We need to be looking at policy and talking about increasing the solutions, using carrots, using incentives. For example, rates getting a discount if you have a planted verge, or if you have PV arrays, or if you have water tanks. Interest rate reductions if you have a lot of greener initiatives. Certainly loan reductions in business opportunities if you have PVs and you're doing your bit. We need to be looking at increased solutions. We need to be looking at incentives. People need that hope, and they need to know what it is they can do. What's been happening is, when it's bad news, is we just shift the goalposts and blame others, and there's been a huge blame game. So what we do is we look at the competitive positioning for here. For example, you can see sun hemp has a very low global warming potential, the little blue bar, compared to polyester in America. And unfortunately, polyester, even if it's recycled, has a very high carbon intensity. So our polyester, we really need to be reusing it, but we really need to be very careful how we use it, and for long-term applications, not for something you're going to toss away next year when it's out of season. As I said, we've invented a new way of measuring impacts, and we look at, for every impact, we look at the corollary. What is the good outcome that we could measure as a benefit? And we've been doing that since 2016. And this is a similar approach that you can all use. It's a self-assessment frog stick. It came out of Adelaide. So it's not just doing less bad stuff, it's doing more good stuff. And again, you can read this in the slides that you can get a copy of if you're looking at. And every community group can use this as their own little barometer. We have done nature positive reports, for example, on all of Laminex's Gympie forest grown products that are made in Queensland. And because Queensland historically had wet summers and dry winters, the Gympie forests have almost zero fire loss. The fire loss in the region tends to be tended to be before Black Summer, tended to be in grasslands. And this is their previous lot before Black Summer, the previous set of results. So these are already being published. And these are, for example, 34% material reuse, 34% fuel recovery, water recovery, 17%, material renewal, 82%, energy renewal, 37%. Certainly in the climate break, they have 181% drawdown, biomass 104% biomass bank. They have forest security is about 73%, and biodiversity security is greater than 90%. So it is possible to measure these outcomes. These results are from third-party certified eco labels from Global Green Tag work. Okay, again, it's very important to know that we can go from unsustainable to sustainable to regenerative, but to make up for the losses, we have to actually create more gains in the short terms and as quickly as we possibly can. So from freshwater loss, we can move to freshwater regain. We did so when we had the droughts, we had water tanks. Now we're in a flooding situation. We need the tree cover and the plant cover to act to mitigate our flash flooding, as well as a lot of other catchment mitigation. We certainly need soil replenishment. We certainly need carbon soil replenishment. We certainly need air purification, and only plants and algae can do that to any significant degree. We certainly need biodiversity regain, which will give us all of these. And we certainly need a climate break. And the biodiversity regain will help with all of those things. So the takeaways, this is the last slide. We need a different approach in policy and guidelines. We've got to start counting benefits that are meaningful for what people can do, individuals can do. We have to look at strategic planning. We have to have checklists and rankings, which is a lot of the stuff that we do. We have to be able to do competitive positioning, comparing hemp to polyester, for example, and making decisions as a consequence. So if you can use hemp bats as insulation, it's going to be preferable in many ways, at least in the next decade, to polyester. We need to be doing the market analysis as we're doing. We certainly need a lot of training and communication in good news assessment, in benefit assessment, not just in all the bad news, because the idea is to persuade and enable engagement of people, as we've been talking about this morning. So thank you for your time, and happy to talk anytime to any of your attendees. I'm on time.
Yes, thank you, Darwin. So Michelle, did you want to do some questions, or?
Yeah, is that okay? We might just have a quick chat, and what I was thinking is I might start if any of our speakers have questions for each other, because I had a quick question for, is she still here?
Oh no, Basha had to leave. She had another appointment after her.
I didn't know. Oh, that's a shame. I was actually going to ask her how the big picture of protecting your backyard, how people in Brisbane can connect to, et cetera, et cetera. So that's okay. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, we might be able to get the details and send it through later.
Yeah, not a problem. So if there are any questions, I might actually, I'm looking in the chat, guys, so I might just go back to the first questions. Now, firstly, I see Paul Bishop, you've shot a note to Wayne in here. I'm not sure, because he's in the room, he might not be able to see that. So what we might do is make sure that you can talk to him or email him. Yeah, so we'll do that. Supriya has a question for Wayne. Is Wayne still with us?
Yes, you want to come up, Wayne? Wayne, do you want to come up or do you want me to bring it down?
Well, if he comes up, people can see him.
Yes, he's coming up now.
Okay, no worries.
Hi.
Hello, Wayne. Hello from the other side of the meeting. So Supriya has a question, and it's what is an example of wildlife awareness venues? And would you be able to list a few ways we can strengthen planning policy and the city plan for wildlife?
Yes, wildlife awareness venues, I can only quote the one that got to the level. Gondwana land that was at South Bank, which went extinct because it wasn't making the money. If ever anything needed a government subsidy, we could think about that again. There's so many buildings at South Bank now that I don't suppose another one would matter, but you could move someone out. And there'd be other venues that we could use around the city as well, or even in the suburbs, dare say.
Sorry, there's a pause in the...
Sorry?
Oh, I just wasn't sure if you were still talking or if you'd finished. I'm sorry for the uncomfortable silences, folks. There's a few pausing in the internet.
All right. So, yeah, the environment centres that are around, like in Karawatha and Boondall wetlands, they're mainly for children and education. The schools get in there and they do a very good job. Are they conducive to the wider community? Probably not at this stage, because they're targeted for children of our local schools, and they do a good job. So they don't really fill the bill for an international tourist. Closest I could get would be Walkabout Creek up at going towards Mount Glorious, where you can see a platypus, you can see the other species around there. You get a little, so if I was an international tourist, I'd promote that as somewhere to go, and you can have a nice meal in the restaurant there. But apart from that, we're not showcasing our wildlife the way the city could.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be a good talking point for this group and others to expand on that. What was the second question? Was about
would you be able to, yeah, I think it's about listing a few ways we could strengthen planning policy in the city plan. And if that's too big an issue, then maybe we can come back to it in a future workshop, because it's actually top of the pops in terms of a big issue. Yeah,
just briefly, my take on that is that at the moment, we're seeing in Brisbane a flood which is built on a floodplain. And the Lord Mayor has said, well, what do you want me to do? Move people out of Fairfield because it's built on a floodplain? Obviously, we can't do that. But if you had your time again, would you build in these areas that are heavily flood impacted? Probably not if we had any intelligence. But does that allow us to keep filling floodplains now that have been left alone, like Hamilton and Galpa are the ones I know? So developers weren't touching them a few years ago, but now they're bringing in 3 or 4 metres of fill and getting the development approval up, which should never be getting up. These are floodplains. They're meant to flood, and they're meant to flood regularly, a lot of them. Doesn't take a big Q event to flood these areas. But with 3 metres of fill, they won't flood, but everything around them will, including the neighbours. What's it going to do to our natural hydraulic and catchment regime? It's not doing anything any good. And there's no research, because everyone we've got to do, they show some of the things that aren't being happening, but it should. But no one's going into what this cumulative effect of filling our lower Brisbane floodplains is going to do. Mm. And on top of that, we're seeing things like natural areas that have been left because they are floodplains, like Eagleby wetlands, south of Brisbane in Logan. Where does TMR, the transport, aim? They're not going to go through suburbs. They're going to avoid all the hassles of doing that. They're just going to target the wetland and put the road right through, right over the top of everything that means something to a very small group of people fighting a losing battle against this big entity. So These are the type of decisions. Our city plan's not strong enough. We've had things we thought we should have won, you know, overdevelopment in a place, 3 metres of fill going in. We should have won that one. Yeah, we should have won it, but council was on our side. They knocked it back. They knocked these things back. But the developers are now seeing that housing costs and opportunities are worth going in on marginal lands in Brisbane. And they know they can get council into a corner with their lawyers and their barristers. Council will only go part of the way before they'll do a deal, usually in favour of the developer. And the excuse for that, or the reasonable excuse for that, is we should be using ratepayers' dollars to pay for lawyers and barristers to defend the city plan. Well, if the city plan was stronger, they wouldn't have to do that. If the state planning policy was stronger, they wouldn't have to do that. At the moment, developers are calling the tune, and that tune means 3 metres of fill is going to keep going in. Our wetlands are going to be affected, and gradually we're going to lose the areas we thought were protected through natural topography.
Thank you, Wayne. And certainly when we get to looking at the bigger picture of thinking about a people's plan for the Olympics, as well as the longer term vision that people have, these are some of the issues we can drill down into. You know, these workshops are a general introduction to thinking together and working together, but we're looking forward to picking the brains of Wayne and others and going over previous documents. Some of our research group in AILA will be going back through the most recent material, like Wayne very helpfully talked about that 2017 survey of people. You know, all the information's out there that we can build some good stories together to go in a different direction. Wayne, just want to mention that Paul Bishop, I don't know if you look into the screen, can you see Paul Bishop? Yeah, anyway, he'd like to connect with you about Redlands City and Tingalpa Creek. Paul, could I suggest you pop your email address or phone number in a private Zoom message to Kira, and she can give your number to Wayne and his number to you. See, we can connect even though we're in different places and on Zoom and such. So we'll come back to that one. There's
Just briefly to Paul.
Yes.
I was out there yesterday with Redlands. We are now a preferred supplier for our rehab work out there. And we looked at with the Bushcare people, a site at Sawmill Road, a beautiful site out there. We're going to do some work on if we get the contract. If we don't, we're still willing to help Redlands with our Leslie Harrison Dam project, where we're looking for projects that are going to be partially funded by SEQ water. So I'd like to be in contact with people like Paul, and I will be. Thank you.
Excellent.
Can
Yeah,
I just say, Wayne?
come back.
Back, Wayne.
We haven't released you yet.
Part of the reason I was interested in discussing, there's a parcel of land that's connected along Tingalpa Creek that goes right down to Thornside. Brisbane is on one side, Redland is on the other. It's a really significant creek catchment that goes up to Daisy Hill, Belmont and Mount Cotton. I think when we think bioregionally along this pathway, it's also proposed at this stage for a whitewater rafting facility to go on one of those sites that council owns. I think to pull that into our thinking, to think, because it's not just the Brisbane Olympics, it's a Southeast Queensland Olympics. So this is a question also for Michelle and this group. Are we able to include these other common sense connections and corridors and look at the ecological significance of them so we can align our thinking and policy planning down the track and how we design together around it?
Short answer is yes, 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 Paul. But let's go to Wayne for the more detailed answer.
Yeah, we've been trying to get up into that upper Tingalpa catchment for years, and finally we got there. We haven't started yet with the SEQ plan for the Leslie Harrison Dam. That's part of the Leslie Harrison Dam catchment. So I'm working with I'm going to work with Redlands, Logan and Brisbane City Council. We're only going to get 10 sites up in year one. It's a 5-year plan, and we hope it'll be ongoing. I'm place like this, like you just described, and getting a 50-50 investment from the local government and SEQ water. That's my job, to try and broker that. I need all the help I can get, Paul. So I might be tuning your ear for assistance. So there's plenty of sites in that Leslie Harrison Dam area and along Upper Tingalpa Creek. I've had some very bad luck up in that section before with trying to get fauna movement solutions over Mount Cotton Road into the dam. And twice I've put projects up there and they've been knocked back. So someone's going to have to come to the party and bring some bucks in.
Thank you, Wayne. Now, just before you go, Wayne, I am going to let you go because we've got a couple of questions for Del. But like Supriya very kindly is typing notes in from folks in the room. Thank you, Supriya. And Fiona, for example, has a question about if developers are working or calling all the shots, how can we work with them directly? Rather than go into that today, do you guys mind? I think after our 4 workshops, which are kind of the beginning of looking at all these different issues, I think we might have a special workshop on how local council, how Brisbane Local Council and other councils are making decisions, how the development system works. Regen Brisbane's really happy to organise even a half-day workshop for our Regen Brisbane and QSEC groups to actually explore what these decision-making issues are, because it's a massive issue and it is at the heart of many environmentalists' time and passion is wasted constantly responding to developer stuff, and there's a lot of information in there. So if you could perhaps just hold pause, but don't feel in any way we're brushing over it. We want to dig into it a lot deeper. And can I just say that Ayla also co-hosts something called a People's Tribunal. We're about to launch a 2-year citizens inquiry into Australia's planning laws as a whole. And we've got 3 lawyers, 7 law students, and we're about to build our experts group. And it's going to be a really important conversation to explore concerns and problems, gather case studies about how the development system is failing ordinary people to care for place. So I'd love to see our workshop. Perhaps we can do that in October as a kickoff for some of these discussions. So spread the word. We're going to talk development and development approvals because it's nasty stuff often. All right. But thank you, Wayne. Wonderful. Can't wait to have more discussions with you. So just going back to a couple of lovely questions for our fabulous Del. And Del, may I just say thank you so much. That talk was, I mean, you're always mind-blowing, but that was really succinct and reminded me of the kind of the approaches that we can weave into what we're doing in a city. And it's really exciting. I love being invited to look at the positive stuff. It's really good. All right. Supriya has a question for Del. Can we mark up spaces in cities that we would like to have transformed? And also a separate question, is it possible to buy hemp bats in Australia?
Every verge is an opportunity for planting. So every roadside verge should be aiming to get 15% soil carbon, to be food for habitat, to be medicine for when you get stuck in floods. So if you have lime leaves, at least you have something to put on a wound. For example, lemon trees. There's lots of native bush tucker that has medicinal applications, and certainly salad greens and things like that. Why we're planting European grasses is beyond me. You have to mow it. Horrible. And yes, a colleague of mine that we were doing some work on a passive house for has designed hemp panels, hemp insulated panels. They're called structurally insulated panels, and they're being tested at the CSIRO at the moment. And he has a supplier and is geared up to start manufacturing. So interested parties, please email me and I'll connect you.
Excellent. And can I just say on that point, I spoke yesterday to Gail Dallaston from, the really remarkable, I've forgotten the name of her initiative. Shady Lanes, which is all about verge gardening and what's allowed and the policies. And we're actually really lucky in Brisbane. We're allowed to plant. Is she here? Is she there?
She's here in person. We're very lucky to have her.
Hello, Gail. So, and I invited Gail to send through her logo and such. We're going to open up our sort of participants page on the Regen Brisbane website. We've been meaning to, but we haven't had the time, so that everyone can find everyone who's in support of the kind of principles, and yeah, connect with Gail. So we'll have Gail come back, and she'll be in your discussions today. But in terms of that question, growing more stuff, and where's the space, etc. So. Thank you, Del. I might just have one more question, if that's okay. Then we'll give everyone a break, because I think we were meant to have a break from 11:30 to 12, but we'll take a 25-minute break short in a minute, and then we'll go into our discussions, which are really important. If you can, please stay on board and put your input in, even if you do a quick 10-minute download if you're online and then run away. We really want your ideas to start informing this beautiful thing we're going to create at the end of the 4 workshops. Actually, Mariel has her hand up. She wants to speak to us, which is lovely. Hello, please speak.
Hi, I'm a textile scientist, so I just want to chuck in my tuppence worth in here. And actually, I've just been at the Cotton Conference, but I was catching up with Stuart Gordon from CSIRO, who does all that hemp work. So it's quite interesting. We're growing a lot, but the actual processing, commercialization here is still at the sort of fairly embryonic stage. So it's coming, and they're doing a lot of work on it. They've just done some trials in Canada where they've been looking at different forms of essentially the hemp straw and what sort of volume of usable hemp they can get out of it. Quite interesting. The highest volume of usable fiber, which is still pretty coarse, probably good for insulation, nowhere near ready for being in garments, was 15% of the actual sort of biomass load. So it's one of those things that's really interesting, in the volume of what you grow and the volume of usable fiber, on the stats on what's actually worth doing. And so it's often the logistics of moving stuff around to where it can be processed that's the make or break on viability. But the hemp community is growing steadily, I would say, in Australia. So I'm sharing good news.
That is exciting. Actually, Mariel, and I hope I'm saying your name correctly.
Yeah, well done.
Could you write in the chat to everyone any ways that I want to be part of the hemp community? I want to know more, do more, grow more. So please put any details in the chat and we'll share them. So yeah,
sure. Well, to be honest, that's just a random, because of the professional link, because of the work I do on cotton, which is much maligned, and actually all natural fibers are part of the solution when we get them in a system in balance. So yeah, we're actually poised to be able to lead the world in this whole.
Oh, we'd love to hear more from you, Mariel, for sure.
Yeah.
And I know we've got Tiziana and others already involved in slow fashion and slow design. So yeah, please, that's exciting. Because I've also been involved in a citizens' inquiry into the impacts of large-scale cotton at the top of the Darling River, and that's nasty. But cotton itself is a fantastic product. So it's something we all have to talk about. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, there's a big difference between what happens on best practice farming versus how we allocate water.
Yes, it's a big issue.
So we're actually, there's a lot of myths to be busted.
There are. Okay, so I think we might have to wrap it there. There are lots of other questions, and I hope that folks, I know by not being all in the room together, it's a little harder, but I'm just going to find, someone actually asked a question about living in Hamilton and how to connect with people. Oh, question from Sarah. She lives in Hamilton, not far from the North Shore Hamilton area. Is there any work being done there by catchment group to protect the waterways? I'm sure there is. Can I leave that one with you, Kira, to maybe help Sarah chat with Wayne?
Yes, I can hook them up so that they can, that question can be answered for sure. Oh, actually, Sarah's in the room, aren't you?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So Priya's been very kind and popping notes in so I can see them, but she's in the room. So
okay, great.
All right. Well, this has been a really excellent panel. Thank you so much, Kira, for introducing folks, and thanks to all the speakers. Seems so weird thanking myself. Thank you to the other speakers. Now, Del, you have to dash off. Yes, but thank you for joining us, and we're going to rope you into many fun-filled activities over the coming months and years. So we will see Del again, and we'll have a special workshop around some of the nature positive planning and ideas. So yeah. But now look, let's
always looking for projects to add numbers to and charts. Very good at chart.
And we have roped Delwyn into our Green Prince Exchange, which means she's part of our family, and she's not getting away anytime soon. Thank you, Del. So look, let's take a break. And Kira and Elise, you're in the room. Would it